A powerful thing you can do in SQL over a single table is to compute an aggregate function of that table. And so in addition to having regular expressions like column names or arithmetic in the select list, we can also have what are called aggregate functions, which are functions that take a batch of tuples, really a batch of values in a column, and compute an aggregate function of that batch of values in the column. So in this example, we're saying select average GPA. Optionally, we could say select distinct, but let's skip that. Select average s.gpa from students, where s.dept equals CS. What we're asking for is the average, grade point average, of computer science students. All right, each GPA entry in the GPA column is a floating point number, and we're getting the average of a number of floating point numbers here. All right, so before producing the output, we'll get all the relevant rows from the table in the where clause, and then for the GPA column, we'll compute this average over all the rows. So before producing the output, we're computing a summary, also known as an aggregate, of this expression, average s.gpa. This query produces one row of output, and in this case, one column of output as well. So it's really an individual one row, one column cell that comes out of this, which is just the average GPA. Average is not the only aggregate, obviously, in SQL. There's other simple things like sum and count and max and min, and some database systems support more complex aggregates or even let you define your own aggregates as well. Now, oftentimes we want to compute the aggregate for each group in a table where we take the table and we break it into groups. So that construct is called group by, and here's what it looks like. You'd say select, and again, you can say distinct if you like, average of s.gpa, comma, in this case, s.department. So we're going to get the department and the average GPA from students grouped by department. So what this is going to do is it's going to partition the table into groups with the same group by column values. So all the computer science students will be in one group, all the English students will be in a second group, and so on. Right? And the group by clause could be a list of columns. It could be department, comma, year of graduation, and then you'd get a different group for computer science in 1 year than for computer science in another year. Right? And then for each group, we compute that average, that aggregate. So the number of rows in the output, sometimes called the cardinality of the output, is going to equal the number of distinct group values. Because for each group, we're going to compute the aggregate average s.gpa. And notice that if something's in the group by list, it can also be in the select list. So department here can be used to tag each group with the name of the department. So in this output here, we'll see the average and the department that average came from. It's very useful to have the group by columns in the select list. Now, after we do a group by, there may be groups that we don't want in the output. So in this example, we're asking for the average GPA and department from students, group by department, having count star greater than 2. So the count star is an aggregate, okay, and the having predicate is going to filter out groups where this aggregate, when you compare it to 2, is true. It's going to keep only those groups. Think of having as being applied after grouping and aggregation. So first we're going to group by department, then we're going to compute counts of each group, and then we're going to evaluate the having clause on those counts and keep only the groups with count greater than 2. Okay, so the having clause can have anything that could go in our select list. It can have aggregates, it can have grouping columns like department. Okay, having is a clause that only applies to aggregate queries. It only makes sense for aggregate queries. It is optional. In our previous slide, we saw a group by query without a having clause. I strongly encourage you to try out group by and having and get comfortable with them before moving on.